Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. We'll leave it a little bit of time just to let some latecomers arrive. Just give it maybe another minute or so, then we'll crack on. Excellent. So I think we've got a good proportion of people already joined. So just a quick thank you to everybody for joining. I know that everybody's running quite busy weeks at this time of the year, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. As you know, you registered. This is the ultimate guide to interviewing as a contract consultant. And that's from myself, Greg Lim, Client Service Director, and my colleague, Joe McKeegan here, Resource Manager for the same practice group. Just before we begin, I would like to just address a few housekeeping items. We will be recording today's webinar, and it will be available for on-demand viewing. We're actually planning on sending out a follow-up email with the link to the recording, but also with the actual presentation itself, including an appendix at the end of it with useful questions to think about, to really give you a toolkit to carry this forward with you. And obviously, if you're aware of anybody out there in the market that could use this, feel free to share. We're also going to be holding a Q&A session, actually 2 Q&A sessions, halfway through and also at the end. And we promised you an interactive session. This is for you, and we hope it's as useful as possible. So feel free to ping questions there as and when. Our colleague Steph is going to highlight where you can put the Q&A. Please put it in the Q&A section, not in the chat section. We will then go through that and answer as many as possible at the halfway point and at the end. And if we don't get through it, we will also follow up, hopefully personally as well. There will also be 2 polling questions as well, and it's important for us to have your participation in that. That will pop up on your screen. It's a simple answer, and that will really allow us to understand what you guys are feeling about this situation in interviewing as well. Oh, apologies. So what we'll cover, over to you, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah. Hey, everyone. So basically, just quickly to highlight what we'll actually go through today in terms of the call. We'll give you a bit of an introduction, both to ourselves and then actually to contract consulting and essentially what that actually means. Then we'll move on to kind of highlight the differences between what you would expect or what you may have seen previously in permanent interviews that you may have had versus consulting meetings and what that actually would look like. We'll then talk a little bit more about interview preparation and logistics before we start going into the questions and answers, going through that Q&A, going through any questions that you may have. Any burning questions that you want to know, feel free to put them into the Q&A, not the chat box. There is a Q&A box separately from that. So just put those in there, and Greg and I will try and go through as much as we can on the Q&A. If we don't get through everything, don't worry, we will make sure to come back and answer every single question that is asked. Most likely we'll be offline and we'll send you a message privately on that front. And then Greg and I will showcase to you all our fantastic acting skills, and we'll go through a few scenarios of what you may see and give you some examples of interview questions and how not to answer in some cases and how to answer in other cases. We'll then move on to body language and demeanor and how to kind of make sure to approach that in the right way. And then lastly, we'll do another Q&A and conclude the end of the call. So hopefully we'll stick to our time slot and get this all done within the allotted time here before 1:30.
So just diving straight into it, we're going to start with the first polling question. So you should have just had that appear on your screen. So the question is, in what aspect of the interview process do you feel you need most help? Do you feel you need help in sufficiently preparing? Are you aware that your body language and demeanor might not be right? Are you looking to improve how to structure your answers and how to pivot responses to get things like your strengths and weaknesses highlighted? Are you a nervous individual, such as myself? Are you looking to know what information to offer in such a short amount of time? Nothing more frustrating than finishing knowing that you didn't quite sell yourself in the best way possible. So please go ahead and answer, and then we can have a look at what the biggest areas are. Okay, so as you can see from the responses, thank you everybody. Looks like most people answered. So it looks like people are pretty worried about getting the right amount of information in there in the short amount of time. And I must admit, that's going to be pretty crucial for consulting opportunities. We'll highlight in the next couple of slides why so. Structuring answers, pivoting responses, that's going to be really helpful in this because Joe and I are going to spend some time on looking through different scenarios and what to be careful for. And then the other aspects, we're also going to dive into that as well. So we'll hopefully all of you will be able to pick up some tips and hints on this. And if you need further help afterwards, we're obviously here.
Not too many nervous folks out there, Greg. There's
No,
must just be us two, hey?
Just feeling pressurized. Lovely. So just a bit more information about us. You know who you're listening to today. My name is Greg Lim. I'm a client service director for Robert Half Management Resources. I've been with the company just over 2 years here in Vancouver. Been in Canada for 2.5 years. As you can tell, I'm British. I worked for an executive recruitment company on the permanent side for 4.5 years back in London, in which we focused on strategy and mergers and acquisitions. And then overlapping obviously into the finance, accounting and systems world that we focus on here at Robert Half Management Resources.
Yep, and in terms of myself, hi, my name's Joe. I'm a resource manager here at Robert Half. So a quick introduction to me, much like Greg, I'm also from the UK. Seems like we all dress the same over there, Greg. We've even got the same attire on today. So yeah, Greg and I both from the UK. I actually started my recruitment career over a decade ago in Hong Kong, of all places. So I actually spent several years over there before I moved to Vancouver about 3 years ago. I have done recruitment in both contract and permanent work before. So I'm actually hoping that I'll be able to give you all some interesting and innovative insights based off my international experience. And hopefully, you know, the intention here today is that will actually really help you really just to perform your best during these interviews based off that kind of international experience.
Wonderful. So some of you, we've seen from the registration that you know us already, but Robert Half is an international recruitment company and management resources is one practice area within that. Joe and I are part of our Vancouver office, and we focus on project consulting and interim contracting across those 4 areas listed on the screen, looking at interim finance and accounting from a senior accountant to CFO level, looking at areas of risk, regulatory and compliance, focusing a lot on business process improvement and systems implementations. And that's not just in finance, that's fully fledged ERP and also HRIS, some payroll as well. And then of course, we look at cost control and cash management. Now, these are umbrella terms. You know, given you are all individuals in your own right, you all bring your own experiences that we can work with. If you want to find out more, there will be chances, of course. So, permanent interviews. My assumption is that everybody here has interviewed for a permanent role in the past. Some of those will have been great, some of those will have been ugly, but there would have been consistent themes. And that's it's important in a permanent interview to demonstrate attributes such as stability and loyalty, progression and development, focusing on reporting lines that you've experienced in the past, dotted and straight, and structures of teams. Skills are usually tested in relation to your readiness for a role. they might in a permanent setting be able to actually provide training, and they would have maybe had time for that as well. Or some of them expect you to be the expert immediately and lead a new team. There's always a case-by-case situation. There will almost always be multiple rounds, ranging from cultural fit, casual conversations to try to get to know you better and try to understand what your expectations are within the role. There's also things like time testing situations, Excel or case studies, presentations and panel interviews. But really aspects like the developments across your career are going to be important. Cultural fit is going to be really important because they're not just thinking about this decision from what's important for them for the next 3 to 6 months. This could be a decision which could impact the business for up to the next 5 years.
Yeah, which is very different compared to contract consulting, what you would experience both in the interview and the actual process itself. So the consulting meetings that you will have will be very different. I mean, they'll really only need to know about the work that you've done to really help you complete the project. If anything, they'd be quite interested to know kind of what your thoughts are and to see if you could facilitate them or their need on a shorter term basis. So there basically will be, a back and forth conversation based on questions related to the detail of the project at hand, orientated around what you could be able to deliver in that shorter space of time. So what you'll probably need to provide to them there, rather than a career run through and a resume run through of how it started and how you've got to where you are, it's more focused and detailed, orientated to the need that they'll have, that whether that's a project or a short-term need. So make sure to provide examples of the work that you've done that really closely relates to that. Usually you'll then find there's an exchange based on kind of resources provided and needed, and what is needed. And then there's usually a shorter amount of time, I would say, based on the culture. I mean, it's still important that there still needs to be that fit there. But I would say that's almost secondary in the consulting meetings. It's really about your ability to deliver on that role. So they often will only really touch on that towards the end of that process. Then often we find that the logistics is mostly arranged through ourselves or a third party, not always Robert Half, of course, but essentially that's where the logistics will be coordinated on that, as opposed to with the client directly. And then, of course, there's always a Q&A process. And so we'll move on later on to talk about preparing for that Q&A as to what types of questions to have ready for that. But it's always important to have questions to ask them and have examples that demonstrates your interest in the role and also your ability to deliver on that position.
Yeah, exactly. Furthermore to that as well, guys, is that, when you're going for a consulting meeting, they're expecting to know exactly what skills you already have rather than the skills that you're able to develop into. And so the Q&A is incredibly important to make sure that everybody is seeing eye to eye. And as you can see in a permanent round of interviews, you normally have up to 3. In consulting, it's often only 1. Just to let you know as well, there's sometimes some different interactions and different feelings to it. The reason why it says interview for permanent and meeting for consulting is that you are coming into this as a subject matter expert to assist them with a problem that they have. They are hoping for you to be the solution. And in light of that, actually at Robert Half Management Resources, we are equally involved in this process. So we would actually attend the meetings alongside our client and you as the contract consultant. That allows us to improve our service for our clients, but also to provide you guys with a lot of feedback as well. That's something you might have discovered since being in Canada. Feedback proactively coming from clients that you may have met or interviewed with is hard to come by. So we aim to try and provide that to you to develop you piece by piece.
Yeah, I think that's good feedback actually, Greg, because I found that even myself when I was interviewing, I had the same kind of thing. You'd even go through an interview process and still not get feedback, and I think I think that is critical because that's really how you learn more about yourself, right? What you did right and what you did wrong. So yeah, I do think that's quite important.
Absolutely. So at the same time, folks, if there's things that you're feeling like you've analyzed yourself quite critically on, but you wanted to bounce those ideas off somebody that can provide common feedback from being in so many different meetings, we can help on that as well. And we would look to prepare you as much as possible in advance. Talking about preparation, over to you, Jay.
Oh, look at that. Look at like it was planned. Yeah. So for me, I think this is absolutely, it's very critical to be prepared. And in the same breath, not being kind of over prepared and not sounding too robotic, too structured. It is very important to make sure that you do what you can to have an idea of what it is that you're getting yourself into in terms of the conversation, the company, and things like that. So I do think it's absolutely critical to spend some time the day before just to kind of make sure you are prepared. And for me, that starts with making sure you test out your computer. Greg and I had to do this yesterday for even this meeting. We made sure to check out, does the computer work, does the webcam work, does the audio work, and the link itself. So I would always advise people just to quickly check, make sure all of that works. With respects to the camera itself, try and place your webcam in a quiet area, if possible. For the most part, we're all at home, and it may not be convenient to do so, but if you can find a quiet space, I would definitely try to do that. And one issue that I found myself recently is try to also make sure you're not impacted by daylight or the sun coming through the window. If possible, try and make sure that it's shining towards you, not behind you. And I have seen that before, where it's right behind the person and you can't see anything. So again, it's just thinking ahead of time as to where you want to be sit, making sure you're comfortable in advance of that. The other thing I would advise, if you can, then try and get yourself a headset. For me, it's a real shame when it happens that you just can't hear the person, the scrambling audio, and that can be really impactful when you're trying to explain yourself and things are cutting out, or it's not clear. So again, if that's possible, I would definitely say try and get yourself a good headset if you can. The other thing is, and this is probably where the research piece comes in, is try your best to just run through all those points there that we've referenced around researching the company, the organization that you're going to be going to interview with. I have had experience throughout my career where the clients gave feedback and they just felt the individual didn't know the basics of the organization that they're interviewing for. We don't expect you to go and do a full amount of research on the organization and spend weeks and weeks doing it, but it's good just to have a basic understanding of the organization, what they do, and it could even be just as basic as going to the website, looking at their about page, and seeing what the business is doing. Try and see where they're located. Some roles at the moment, particularly within contract consulting, are on a remote basis, but others may require you to go in, or it may be remote moving into hybrid into the next year. So just see, look into the location, see if it's feasible for you, if that may be impactful. Same goes for LinkedIn profile or really just social media. Try and get some information that may help it facilitate a more warmer conversation. Again, that's not stalking the individual on Facebook for the last 20 years of what they've been doing, but it's very much a case of, if you can, look at the LinkedIn, see if you've got connections that are linked to each other, and then see if you can casually kind of bring that into the conversation. There really is nothing warmer than, oh, I saw that you know XYZ, and it really does facilitate a much warmer conversation. Especially if it's a good contact of yours and theirs, that can actually lead to them saying, oh, that's great, and then getting kind of feedback from that individual as well. It can almost act as a reference, so that can certainly be quite useful. So I would certainly say utilize the social media as much as possible. And then the last part there here on the slide, I do think it's very important to prepare as many examples as you can. Highlight your relevant skills based off the information we've shared with you beforehand, or whoever it is beforehand, about the role. Make sure you prepared examples to say, this is what I've done, this is what I can do for you. And I always used to advise people to structure that answer as best possible. Highlight what it is that you want to say about yourself as like your strength or your skill. Say, this is what I've got, this is where I did it previously, and this is how it applies to yourself and your organization and how I can help you. And I always think following that structured process whenever you answer a question is certainly quite useful. Basically, every time you get a chance to speak, you want to sell yourself. So try to have as much preparation around that as possible. Same goes for questions. Make sure to have a couple of questions ready to ask, as you're going through the interview. Don't just wait for the end and then go, hey, have you got any questions? Just in case you're running out of time, try and ask them so it becomes more conversational, as opposed to just waiting to the end and asking some fairly generic questions. Try and ask it as it goes through, and it'll lead to a much better flow.
Yeah, I will definitely second a lot of that, Joe. Definitely. I mean, if we just go through a lot of that, the basics in terms of good headset and good video, you know, we've been going through this for nearly 2 years now. There's few excuses out there to not be prepared for this, and it is down to you as well. And if you've only got one shot and that shot is only half an hour, you want to be putting in the best version of yourself, and that does include non-pixelated cameras and good clear headsets. With regards to the research, I just wanted to allude a little bit about the work that I would do on performing business development and client relations, because it is absolutely paramount for me to be doing research into the companies that I'm working with. And the last piece there, recent and pertinent news, can really give you an understanding of the lay of the land. It could give you an understanding of the pressures that CFO or VP of finance might be under at the moment. You know, if they're going through an IPO and an ERP implementation all at the same time, then they're probably going to hope that this meeting is only 20 minutes. And so, you know, therefore, you know that you need to be succinct and to the point even more so. So it's thinking along those lines. We'll talk more about the questions and how to highlight relevant work in our scenarios. So moving on from the preparation very easily blends into logistics, really. And a lot of this is simple, so I hope I don't come across as patronizing on this. You know, it's important to log on to an interview or turn up to an interview 10 minutes before. And if you plan for 10 minutes, and that gives you an extra 5 minutes to cater for things that might be uncontrollable. You know, use headphones. The reason is you can get a lot of feedback from them as well. And obviously the beautiful headsets that we're adorning today can do that, but some of the headphones work as well. Things like put your phone on airplane mode or just turn it off. Nothing worse when a distraction comes in. It can actually impact you and the flow of your conversation to that client as well. So don't shoot yourself in the foot with that one. I was in a meeting the other day, and however senior and fantastic this individual was in their preparation, they're almost too prepared, really. They'd pretty much written down everything that they wanted to say, and it was on a screen almost like this. And whilst they were trying to make sure it wasn't obvious, it just does come across as incredibly obvious. In our training, we are told to have an idea of what to say in mind, but to never script. And that's why on the receiving end, you can always tell. You know, there's corny sayings like smile and dial. It makes a difference. And it's similar on this case as well. You know, have prepared material, but it's important it's coming from you in your own words, and therefore reading doesn't actually demonstrate you being human. So a client may leave thinking, well, that's great, but how much was that actually them? Weird dressing, we don't always match. We're good friends in our personal lives, Joe and I, but we didn't plan the blue and white, I promise. But there are certain industries out there where you would have turned up in a suit and it wasn't appropriate at all, and also vice versa. You know, in your research, you could probably get a good understanding, but if you're working with a third party such as Robert Half, please do ask. They will be able to give you the information needed there. What you're really trying to do is dress exactly as your client would be doing so. So we've received a few questions throughout this, but please do have a think now. As I said, it's going to be much easier for us to answer these questions now. And with the other individuals here, your questions could also help them. So please do have a think and get them in there. But I'm just going to fire off with one that came through quite quickly after the first poll was, what is the #1 mistake that we see? I don't know for you, Joe, but probably two spring to mind for me. One is that people aren't detailed enough. Given that you're
Mm.
really trying to give them the confidence in your ability to take this on, and you've only got a small amount of time to prove that, if you're not providing enough detail, how can that person feel rest assured of your ability? And so we'll go into that in more detail later. And then the other one is the lack of questions. If you're not asking questions, it gives the feeling that you're not interested. And sometimes you'll turn up into a meeting or interview and you find out that you're not interested, but it's actually incredibly important that you finish the meeting fully professional and interested the entire time. That person could be having a bad day. That person could also have a personality trait, which means that it takes them 10 minutes to warm up as well. If you're on your A game throughout the whole thing, you never know how that client could turn around halfway through and actually end up impressing you as well. And it's similar for questions. You need to ask some really good questions. And there are some obvious goes to, which we'll provide in the appendix in our follow up here. But there's also some ones which will help you to demonstrate that you are the subject matter expert for this project specifically. Obviously, that's a case by case basis and what the need is. But that's probably the number one, number two mistake that I see. Joe, anything to add there?
Yeah, I agree. And I think with respects to the question piece, it's important to have that, not just for this, just to ask questions. Yes, it can showcase an interest level, but it actually also helps you make a decision as to whether it's the right fit for you. I mean, I think Greg and I will always say it's a two-way process, right? It always is. You need to figure out whether it's also the right kind of fit for you. And so it's important to think about what you need to get from that conversation. Not just having those generic questions to ask to showcase I'm asking questions. It's think about what's important to you for you to understand what you need to get out of that conversation beforehand. Because it also helps when you come out of the interview. You might come out of an interview or a meeting and say, I don't know if I've got enough information because I didn't get to ask these questions, and it helps you with a follow-up as well. So yeah, I agree with that, Greg.
Yeah, definitely.
We do actually have a follow-up question as well, but I don't know if that's necessarily related to that, Greg, but we do have a question here.
That looks there. So thank you for sending that through as well. So how to go into details without taking too much time. We're actually going to, in one of the upcoming slides, just in 2 slides time, this is going to be a scenario that we're going to go through as well. So we're going to give you some live examples. Sorry about our acting just before that, but we'll give it our best shot.
I'm expecting calls from Hollywood, Greg. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So that will be your judgment afterwards on how it goes. But yeah, this is built from our own experiences and from our experiences from all our consultants as well. There's some questions here coming through about broader Robert Half, which I just wanted to dive into as well. Management resources is one division amongst many. We focus on finance and accounting. We also have marketing, creative, technology. We also work on HR, admin, customer support, and also legal. And there are 6 divisions that offer both contracting and permanent support. So do think about your loved ones and friends and family and other networks. We're always interested in talking to individuals, and that's from a broad variety of levels and functions as well. So, we work very closely alongside our permanent finance and accounting team. That would also run from a senior accountant to CFO level, more often than not working with designated professionals. And yeah, we meet with them once a week to make sure that we are addressing our clients' issues in the best way possible for our clients. And that also gives us an opportunity to represent our consultants as consultants or candidates for permanent roles too. We work with 3 types of consultants on our team, really. We have individuals that are diehard consultants and want to be for an extended period of time. They may even set up their own independent consulting. We also work with individuals that are simply using a contract to facilitate an interim period for themselves. And that can be a longer project of up to a year or even longer, or it can be very short projects, right? We would have somebody that finds themselves available and wants to try their hand at something they already know in a different company. Some of our projects range down to 2 weeks all the way up to a year. So it's very different. Joe, there's another one that's just come through. I don't know if you want to address that one.
Sure. So yeah, we've got another one that basically asks, do you get as much detailed information from the client for contract positions as much as Robert Half does for permanent positions? And so I hope I'm taking that question correctly, but in terms of the information that we get beforehand, as from Robert Half's perspective, we very much go through a detailed briefing with the clients, whether that's from a contract perspective or a permanent perspective. So beforehand, we will provide you with as much detail as you would get from both positions in terms of the scope of the role, the duration of the contract, the pay rate of the contract, through to kind of what the client is looking for, why this position's there. So from our perspective, we will get as much detail to provide to you from the client on a contract position as well as permanent positions. In terms of during the interview process itself, you would still get time to kind of ask those same questions. So yeah, you should be able to get as much information from the positions in a contract role as a permanent role. The only difference I would say, to be quite frank, is that you would just have less face time with the client during the interview process. Going back to kind of the earlier slide, you may only have one chance to have a meeting with them compared to several rounds in a permanent role. So that would probably be the only thing I would say where you may not get as much information. And that's why we go into so much detail beforehand, so that you have a full picture of what their expectations would be even before you've met with the client.
Yeah. This is a good segue actually to highlight something else as well. You know, by just saying contract positions, there's also a difference between contract positions and consulting as well. So a contract position may be more of an interim need. I need a controller for the next 3 months, for example. And that need could come from a variety of different reasons as well. But obviously for that, it's important for us to know exactly what the duties are, but within that 3-month period. So often we will look at phased approaches. Often we will look at what the priority lists are, and we'll be focusing on maybe the top 5 responsibilities rather than what an entire job description would lend for, let's say, a position which we would expect you to be there for a couple of years. But then at the same time, some of our consulting engagements are more of a project in itself. So let's dive into the work we do for ERP or systems improvements. A case study recently, as we were working for a construction business, has been very successful in its M&A activity. And as a result is creating a fully fledged ERP to sit across up to 19 different entities. And we've been working on the program director positions, project management positions, and business analyst positions, and that's from start to finish. So they needed us to do a requirements gathering exercise, they needed us to do the vendor selection, and then through into the other pieces as well. And we would be able to provide some of the individuals coming in after the vendor selection with all of the modules that would be being worked on. So we go into great technical detail, but it's always a case-by-case basis on exactly what the need is. So I hope that helped to answer that question. But in short, yes, one of the things that you can rely on from Robert Half is the detail that we provide. So there's a number of other questions anyway, but we'll get to that. And please do keep putting them on as we feed it. We've got another session at the end, which we'll give more time to as well. So the next poll, Joe.
Yep. So as you can see, it's just popped up there. So this one's a pretty straightforward one for you all. It's basically just, have you interviewed for a contract or consulting position in the last 6 months? And the answers are yes or no.
This will allow us to also, yeah, this is maybe. This will allow us to follow up with you as well to kind of support.
Oh, interesting.
Excellent. Okay.
Results are in.
A really good spread. Okay, fantastic. So, you know, for those people that haven't interviewed for a contract consulting position, there's going to be a lot of detail here. So please just make sure that you're understanding that brief, and feel free to follow up with us afterwards if this sounds interesting and you want to get involved in one way or another. And then for those that have as well, we'd be really interested to know your feedback following this event, or on the Q&A as well to see whether or not the information we're providing you with resonates. You know, are you agreeing with it? Would you disagree? Would you make any changes? What have your personal experiences been? You know, really what we're trying to create is a communicative environment here in which we can have very open, balanced conversations with our consultants and clients. So feel free to follow up with us on that one. Excellent. So as promised, the infamous examples and scenarios.
Very excited. Okay, so I'll assume the role of interviewer and interview Greg. So hey, Greg, how do you believe you'll be able to add value to our current project?
Well, Joe, I understand you're moving from NetSuite to SAP, which will obviously be causing a lot of issues. You know, I've seen them in the past, so I'm guessing you're facing them now, of course. So, you know, with my experience and the detail that I have, I would come and redesign the implementation process to iron out any deficiencies and make this a smoother process. Now, I don't know what you're thinking about that, whether or not that sounded good or bad. But for us, there's a lot of assumptions in that. You know, that could be a
sorry,
question.
Greg, we use QuickBooks. I don't know where you've got this information from.
Assuming that the information's obviously correct there. You know, you don't know necessarily the involvement that that client has had. We've actually ended up having some individuals, some clients feeling quite offended by the assumptions that consultants make. And it also can make you seem quite arrogant, I must admit, even if that is in confidence. Every situation out there is a case by case. And this tees us up to just remind you, always ask questions. You know, that's a big old question there from Joe to me. How do you believe you'll be able to add value to our current project? If that was at the beginning, they may not have even given you detail about it from their sides. So just never assume. Okay, be detailed, don't waffle. So Joe, tell me about your work experience and how it is appropriate to our current needs.
Yeah, well, you know, so I was born 50 years ago, and I basically started my career in the early 90s. There I was a staff accountant. I was just basically helping out, doing kind of some transactional work, really, a bit of AP, a bit of AR. You know, before I actually moved on from that organization. As you can see, that was basically just me rambling on, and it kind of highlights too what we were talking about before, I think, Greg, right, where you don't need to go through the whole life walkthrough, resume walkthrough. It's very much about answering his question, which was, tell me about the work experience and how that's appropriate to their current needs. So talking about experience 30, 40 years ago, it's not irrelevant as such, but it's just not relevant to the question. And you want to make sure that you're being as succinct as possible, just to make sure to also maintain, I guess, their interest level, because they may think, okay, well, this is irrelevant, and they may check out, they may stop listening. Anyways, to when you actually get to the point that is relevant, they may not have been listening.
Absolutely. And we all get carried away when we're talking as well, right? So something that I always like to say is, if you feel like you're starting to waffle or to go on tangents, and you start to forget, you know, really what the client was trying to get out of this, it's okay to pause. It's okay to see if the client would like you to elaborate further on any detail. So you can break up your questions, your answers with questions, and that will actually make it more of a conversation than a one-way process, you know? So in order to be detailed, obviously you need to listen intently. And a rule of thumb is to try and answer that question in 2 to 3 minutes, really. You know, we see tangents happen a lot. And really it's a shame, because it's actually just a waste of time. Because you only have potentially 30 to 45 minutes to demonstrate that you can perform and complete the task at hand.
Yeah, I think that's quite quite good feedback actually, Greg. Like in terms of noticing how long as well you're taking on answering the question. If you feel like you've been talking for too long, it may be a time to do what you just said there and pause.
Yeah.
And you can even ask the question back to them. Just say, do you want, like you said, do you want more information, or do you feel that did that answer your question?
Yeah.
You can even prompt that response from them by asking that.
Exactly. Depending on who you're working with, depending on what project you're going for, there's a high chance that that person has your resume in front of them, right?
Mm.
And so listen to the question that's being asked and answer exactly that. So have structure. This goes to the question earlier, how to go into details without taking too much time. This definitely will help.
Yeah, perfect. So Greg, have you been involved in an ERP implementation before?
Yes, I have. We implemented Microsoft.
Okay.
Did you all notice the flat line after that? It's so important to have structure to allow you to go into detail. And as I said, the number one mistake that I see is people not going into enough detail. You are talking to somebody with basically a very similar skill set to yourself as well, and they're interested in this work and diving into it. So go into detail and have structure. Now, my past experience was working with strategy consultants that have to demonstrate high levels of emotional intelligence because they're dealing with the strategic direction of a business, which obviously is complicated stuff. And back in London, I became very acquainted to a partner from McKinsey & Company who helped us help our consultants and our candidates back there. And they always said that they expect the answers to questions to be in the following format. And I would ask you all to write this down. It's a simple 3-stager and will allow you to practice before coming into this. So what did you do? What was your direct responsibility? Did this fit into the context of a team? The reason why that's important is, are you demonstrating yourself as an individual contributor? Or do you also have teamwork experience? And of course, that will be appropriate to whatever the project is. And then the last piece is, how does this affect the company? Do you have a holistic view on the situation? Are you understanding the impact of your work on a greater scale? Now, I'm sure everybody in this room probably has aspirations to become more senior, right? And to become more savvy, and then ultimately get promoted and get more interesting projects on and on. And if you follow that flow, really there aren't many gaps in your answer then, because you're talking about your individual contribution, the team around you and how you worked with other individuals there, and then ultimately you're understanding what the impact is in the bigger scale. So A, B, C, you, others, and then the company.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. And so Greg and I think, kind of both wanted to highlight a little bit around this. Also, the terminology itself, fluid intelligence, may not be that common. Some individuals may want to know what that is, but essentially what we need you to do is kind of demonstrate fluid intelligence. And that comes in many forms. So one of which would be the ability to hit the ground running. And this is very important for contract consulting, absolutely. Giving them an example of when you had to do so. What situation did you find yourself in where you had to pick up something very quickly, and you just kind of had to figure it out as you were going along, and doing so in a fast-paced manner. A lot of the contracts that we're working on need someone to actually do that. And unfortunately, for some cases anyways, if you can't demonstrate that, they may not have the time to actually help you in terms of picking things up slowly, much like you might do in a permanent position, for example. So that
Yeah.
I think is definitely quite critical.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, I just merged two together. One is versatility and the other one is flexibility, fairly similar. Ultimately, you have many skills and there may be an opportunity for you to be able to use those other skills, even if they're not drawn out in the original description of the current need. And one of the benefits to a client, and I think it's important to put yourself in the client's shoes on this, is the flexibility that going down a contract consulting route offers them. Our work is on an hourly basis, for example, so it's not always full time, which helps clients with budget constraints. It also allows us to think flexibly about, right, okay, well, we can work with a very senior individual, potentially in fewer hours. So there is an air of flexibility around this line of support, which I think is important to address, because if you can provide information about your experiences, which demonstrate your flexibility and versatility, that might just be the winning ticket.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think lastly, the last thing I thought I'd just highlight is kind of speed of thought. I mean, ultimately, you're being hired as the subject matter expert in this area. You will have a lot of knowledge that you can draw on. And so it's a case of just making sure you can do that in again, it's that fast-paced manner. I guess that does also link to ability to hitting the ground running, but it's showcasing that you can quickly draw on your experiences and convey that to them.
Absolutely. And there's different ways to kind of get that across. But one of the simple ones is if you're listening really intently and you are well prepared to know exactly from the bullet points of what the job description is or the need is, if you're well prepared to have flexible answers around that, you'll be able to bring in that information. And as Joe said earlier, anytime you get a chance to speak is an opportunity to sell yourself, and being quick-witted and quick to understanding the issue at hand is going to give them a lot of confidence in your ability. So one of the other ones around what structure to put into place is to be quantifiable, right? Majority or all of you are finance and accounting professionals. You are dealing with numbers. A lot of the work will be maintenance, but a lot of the work you will have done will have been talking about how we can improve a certain process. So for example, I was responsible for working on an accounts receivable project where I analyzed overdue accounts. The contract agreements provided information on payment terms and cleaned up a $2 million backlog of receivables on key accounts. Additionally, I provided recommendations on improving AP and AR, purchasing processes that resulted in business savings of $100,000 per year. Something like that, getting the numbers in, understanding that you can get in cost saving measures, time saving measures, or achievements that are simply quantifiable. The other aspect to provide on this is again overlapping with detail, but give context about the firms that you have worked in. If it is a related experience, the size of the company, both in terms of revenue, headcount, the industry, those are contributing factors to that client realizing that that experience is directly relevant to what we're looking at today.
Yeah, I think that's good, Greg, because that's something I always look to ask from individuals. It's the skill set you've got that's maybe not always on a resume. It's what you've done that is quantifiable. It's so easy to showcase that to a client as a an added value. And then lastly, so Greg, what happens if a client dives straight into asking questions about your experience? What do you do?
Yeah, so the interviewer doesn't always proactively offer detail on their needs, and kind of overlapping, going back to the don't make assumptions. One of the most powerful things that you can do to make sure that you've got control over this, but also to make sure you're not assuming, is to simply ask them straight away. So ask them as early as appropriate what needs they have and their expectations from the chosen consultant. You have so many sides to you as an individual. How do you know which one to use and which one to sell if you don't truly know what they're looking for? And as we said, you can have this as a one-way process, but if you actually make it more of a conversation, it's going to be highly beneficial for you as well. So put it back on them nice and early in a polite and professional way, and ask them exactly what they're looking for. That will help you then have continued positive sales of yourself throughout the next 30-45 minutes.
We've got a nice question on that, Greg. So we'll we'll do that in the Q&A section. But it is related. So yeah, just moving on. I mean, I don't want to necessarily spend a ton of time on this, but I do want to just highlight some of the keys around it. You know, I think it's very important to understand your body language and how you're presenting on the video call. So it's linked to a lot of what we've said before, I'm sure, but it really is a case of, you know, paying attention to what's being said to you, what's being asked of you in the interview. I think that's absolutely critical to building a bit of a relationship, because it shows your interest level. When someone's not paying attention, looking away, and not interested, honestly, that in itself could lead to someone not being successful. You know, much like Greg and I have throughout this conversation, you know, try and sit upright if you can. Be aware of your hands. You can use them. I use them probably a lot more than Greg, I think, in terms of being expressive, but it's done in the right way. It's not just flailing them around. It is just keeping yourself controlled. In terms of, I guess, hands, face, they all relate, but it's just all about how you're presenting yourself. Try not to use your hands to, you know, scratch your face. I actually do that a lot myself. It's something I'm aware of, so I have to kind of try and rein that in. Same goes with facial expressions. I'm actually quite an expressive person, so try not to showcase that at an interview. If it's a positive thing, you know, smiling, be happy, that's wonderful. And honestly, you feel much warmer when someone's feeling that way. You don't have to smile and be happy, but it's a nice way to express yourself. But just be aware of what you may also be doing that's not necessarily great, in terms of, you know, frowning or just being, when they ask you something that you're not interested in, just showing a lack of interest with your face. So try and relax, be yourself, and take your time. And for me, they kind of come together, but being yourself is really critical. That will come across, for me, the most. If you can be yourself with it, that's how you build a relationship with someone, is just they can feel if you are being who you are. And that ties into what Greg was saying before around that individual that had a script, which is great, but you're not really being who you are. You're reading from the script. It's great answers, but is that you? And sometimes they'll not actually feel that they'll not feel they've got a good sense of who you are, and therefore they may not feel if it's a right fit or not. So I would definitely say just be aware of all these things. Everyone has their own personality. It's not a case of everyone just doing the same thing, and that's where that be yourself is critical.
Yeah. Use interactions over Teams with recruiters as practice as well, right? Try and facilitate it as well, and ask them as well, how did you feel about my presence on this virtual meeting, right? They'll give you feedback. You know, you can be introverted with a good body language. You can be extroverted with a good body language as well. A lot of it is being comfortable and relaxed and professional, and so that's fine. So we'll move on, just cognizant of time as well. Demeanor overlaps, to be honest. You know, we could have put it on one page, but there was too much information. I think it's important never to get too personal or too casual with the client. You are trying to build a relationship immediately, but it needs to be very brief. This is a good time to talk about standard societal matters: kids, dogs, rain, weather, you know, all these kinds of things. But in a half-hour meeting, this isn't what this is about. So it's about being professional. Okay. As I said earlier, always give them the impression that you want to secure the project. You never know who these people are connected to as well. Vancouver is a crazily small market, especially when we harness and focus in on finance and accounting. So you want to be putting in a good impression with everybody, even if this opportunity isn't for yourself. Very much similar to body language on being yourself. Don't oversell yourself. It's got to be accurate information. There is a home for everybody. And it's, you know, if you go in there having promised the world and it doesn't work out, it will just blow up, and it will end up affecting yourself, the client and their project more primarily, and then whoever else is connected to it as well, such as ourselves. One thing we always hear is fairly negative comments regarding past experiences. Whilst they might be true, it's just not good etiquette. For me, that's here in Canada or in London. If it's different around the world, obviously we are in Canada right now. So the feedback from us is don't be negative about past experiences. from another angle, it's not appropriate necessarily to negotiate in a meeting as well. Talk to whoever you're working with about that as well. But more often than not, for example, ourselves, we would be doing the negotiation for you. And it's something that we do every minute of every day. So we're definitely the professionals on it, and we will be representing you very fairly there. Finish it off in a professional way. Thank them for their time. They have given half an hour out of their busy schedules. Ask about next steps as well. By doing that, you're kind of getting a little bit of control there too. So yeah, those are the basics anyway. So we'll move on. So this is the Q&A. We've had a few others come in. One of them wasn't quite sure about it, so I'll follow up with that individual afterwards. What if the client starts to negotiate during the interview? How do you recommend handling this? Yeah, great question, because it does happen sometimes. In our setting, it's fine, like, because I would be there, I would interject at that point and I would say, we can deal with that afterwards. And that's commonly known in this industry. So the client would probably be trying to take something into their own hands. So it's also expected that you would also say, well, I would prefer you deal with that with Greg afterwards, because you don't necessarily know all of the context here. And it's important that we debrief. We know what the feedback is before we know how to negotiate. But actually in contracting and consulting opportunities, there isn't much of a negotiation. So Joe's team would be understanding what a pay rate would be. And once we secure that with you, that is what we present to our client. It's not a back and forth situation there. There may be chances to renegotiate terms later on in the contract, for example, dependent on a change of brief or scope, or just you really improving or impressing, more importantly. So, but commonly it's not accepted. And so somebody should interject and just say, actually, I'd feel more comfortable directing that through Greg after the meeting. That would be respected by them.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to do it, Greg, because I've had it before, and I had this previously in Hong Kong, where the person just said, "I don't want to talk to you about it," and it was very abrupt. So it is about handling it in the right way and just saying, hopefully we can discuss that through Greg or whoever it may be. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Handle that in the right way. Yeah, I know we've got a couple of questions here, Greg, and I'm actually I'm familiar with some of the individuals that have asked those, but because I don't want to overrun, I personally can get back to each one of those about those questions. But thank you so much for sending them over. They're all very interesting questions, and I think it's definitely worthwhile going through that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just that last one, I think it's worthwhile saying that because we've spoken about it a few times. Can you give example how to give the impression you want to secure the project? It's remaining professional. It's your facial expression as well. It's really obvious when somebody starts to lose interest in something. And so it's just remaining present, I think, is a really good way of doing it. Still ask all the questions, still thank them for their time. It's all of those pieces. The indication that somebody wouldn't want it would come from, kind of a stopping, bothering and caring and kind of looking a little less interested. And that's just the glimmer in your eyes. That's maybe not asking any questions as well. So it's actually really easy to give the impression that you want it. Lovely. So just the last question there about what's next.
Yep. So for those of you that haven't already done this, because as I say, I know a few people on this call are familiar with who I am and have maybe gone through this process already. But if you are very interested in becoming a consultant, even if we've had a conversation before and you just want to catch up with me, next steps would be to have an initial call with me. I basically just quickly kind of run through what your situation is to understand you and your needs and see if I am the best resource for you here at Robert Half. We will then get you through the registration process, which is where we dive much deeper into your background, your experience, to understand who you are. From that, I will basically create your profile that I share internally with my team so they know who you are and the skills you've got. And we actually share that with our clients externally, along with your resume whenever we do submit you to any role. So it's a very critical piece in the process. But yeah, that's essentially kind of how that would go from there.
Yeah, as with anything around employment, there are certain specific provincial and international laws at play here. And I think it's important to understand really what it means. If you're interested in contract consulting, there are a variety of different structures that can be used that will be appropriate for different people. And whilst we're not allowed to give legal advice, we can suggest the hard facts about it. Some that spring to mind here are knowing what BC law suggests, understanding insurance policies and independent contractor, understanding what compliance there is from an insurance perspective, from a tax perspective, expenses, all these different things. And, if it was a short-term engagement, then I would suggest that it is absolutely worthwhile just coming through our payroll or a different payroll structure if that's being provided. But sometimes as a contractor, you would have to set up your own entity. So there are some complications there. Lots of information can be found across the web. So, it's worthwhile starting to look at that. But obviously, as part of our registration process, we would be providing you with that. The other thing that I think Joe and I just wanted to finish on really was about the general feeling in the air around clients, consultants, third-party individuals such as ourselves. Really, the situation is that there's a client there that has an issue, and we're trying to provide them with a solution, but we're doing that with you, for you, and for them. And so as a result, what we really want to create is an active consulting network. We have had that for many years here, operating for around 20 years in the BC market, but we want it to continue. And it means being human with us, and it means being active and involved with us as well. We are genuinely wanting to build long-lasting relationships with you guys. And we hope that maybe you might be a consultant with us or a candidate for us at some point. Maybe you might be a client with us in the future. But mutual feedback and mutual respect goes a long way, and it sets the tone perfectly for success going forward, and should also transcend in any interview that you are then going into as well. So we'll finish there. Thank you so much for everybody attending. I think we've gone 1 minute over time, so we'll let you go back on. But as we promised, we will be sending this toolkit to you afterwards, including the recording and the presentation itself. We'll get back to anybody that didn't have their questions answered as well. So Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.